Hi, I'm David, and I'm back with Magic ManaStrike. A different video today. Usually I have either ranked ladder play or event gameplays with commentary, but instead I wanted to make a video with my own commentary and opinions on the upcoming balance changes. Now, the day that I'm recording this is April 7th, and the balance changes were announced today, and the update is happening overnight, such that they will be live tomorrow, April 8th. Just to give you a reference, if you're watching this video either right now or in the future, just so you know sort of where I'm at and where Netmarble is at. So I will also link the page in which they describe all of their opinions on the changes down below. And if you're scrolling, you might as well consider leaving a like on this video or subscribing to the channel. Like I said earlier, I try to post gameplay videos every other day. So let's jump right into it. I am going to skip the details on the Ajani and Nahiri balance changes. So let's not call them nerfs or buffs, because a theme throughout this update seems to be focusing cards on their intended niches. So I'll get to that in a second, but the Planeswalker changes were, again, not nerfs, not buffs. They were really just to make the Planeswalkers work the way they were supposed to. And I don't play Ajani or Nahiri, so I'm going to skip over those. The first, I'm just going to go in order, and white and blue happen to be first and second respectively, and also they have a lot of balance changes. So the first card to receive a balance change is Soul of Theros. And since I've linked you the page, I won't necessarily go into the exact numbers unless I think that they're relevant. But the Soul of Theros, they said the goal was to leave it as a tank unit, but it was overall too good. And I've actually said this a bunch in my draft videos. I love the Soul of Theros. It only costs 5, whereas the other tank units like the Balath cost 6. It has a lot of health. Look at that. Right now, my Soul of Theros has 2,500 health. So that is a lot, especially for a 5-drop and one that I would use as a tank. So I was already using this guy as a tank. But not only does he tank, he can attack in response. And not only does he attack, his attack is AoE, which makes him a wonderful tank because opponents want to play a bunch of small units to defeat a tank unit. So the fact that his attack is AoE is wonderful. In addition, and this is one of the crazy parts that Netmarble acknowledges, he just does too much. He AoE attacks air and ground units, and thematically that's because this is a soul of a plane, so it's this really physically giant creature, hence it can reach the air units with its spear. But I just loved that it could damage both air and ground units that were attacking it. And finally, this list never really ends. Well, I guess it ends here. Its death effect is that it grants indestructible shortly to the allies, which again just makes it such a good tank, because when it gets out into the enemy's territory and dies, then all your units are indestructible for a few seconds. So Netmarble uses the word ambiguous, and I don't particularly like the use of that word here. But what I think they meant by ambiguous was that its attack and health distribution did not make it clear to the players. It sort of obscured the intent of the card. And that's because at 286 attack, it has better attacks than some of the 3-mana units like Birds of Paradise and I don't really know specific numbers too well, but it has pretty good attack. But also it's a huge HP tank card. So what Netmarble has decided to do is decrease its attack by almost 100, I guess about 80 for the base, but increase its HP 1,000 points. So this should make it very clear that its attack is medium to low now. So it's not actually going to take out those maybe Shimon Dragons or Ash Cloud Phoenixes. It can probably still, even at 178 attack, it'll take out Hadron Scouts and Clockwork Beetles and things like that. So it will still get those little units, but it won't be as devastating to the larger units, but it'll stay alive a lot longer now. So it keeps its death effect, it keeps its air and ground melee attacks. So the theme of the card hasn't changed, it's just been tweaked to make it more clear that Soul of Theros is White's tank card. So I largely agree with that. And I'm not happy, or I am happy to see it remain an ability creature. Okay, the next card is Tailless Paladin, and they call this sorry, I'll pull up the Tailless Paladin. They call this mana cost effectiveness, which is another term that they sort of repeat in the forum post that I linked. So they say its mana cost effectiveness was somewhat inefficient, and I don't particularly know what this means. They don't acknowledge that much. Its ability, which is Tailless Paladin, is a wonderful card to play, but it's not very commonly run in my experience. It is immune to crowd control, and most specifically, it should be immune to Wave Crash Triton's status effect. So, the fact that it melee AoE attacks ground, its movement speed is very fast, but it costs 5 again. So it's not as... we can see that mine at level 5, or no, actually at level 1, it does have a lot of HP, and it has comparable attack to the 287, to the 286, but it has even more HP than the Soul of Theros. So it's actually pretty comparable to Soul of Theros itself, but they apparently didn't like that too much, and I also think that this card is probably underplayed to what they want, because like I said, it's a really good card. It's a tech card as well. If you are facing a lot of opponents who want to do debuffs, it should also be immune to Circle of Pain. I think Netmarble wants this card to be used more, and I personally would love to see this card used more in competitive decks. So they've increased its base attack from 287 that you see here to 324. So that is about 50 attack points, which I don't think it'll kill anything in one swipe now, but it will definitely, after 2 swipes, dealing 100 extra damage is probably the difference between answering stuff like Blinding Mage and other, low to medium health units it'll take out with less swings. So, in addition, if it reaches the tower, like a Sub-Guardian or just a building, it will deal more damage for the time it's alive, and I think that is totally encouraged with this card, because I think it's a great card, specific card. It shouldn't overwhelm the meta like certain other cards have. So that was a pure buff, and we're going to see that Airdropnauts as well received a pure buff. I have seen them a couple of times in like draft and sealed events because they're an okay card. They're really high risk, but they're supposed to be high reward, given that the dwarf drops right up on the building, but the airdrop part itself, the like wings or whatever, they only attack the building. So you can send in the airdrop part, hits the building, and then drops a dwarf that will damage the building. However, they are somewhat weak at 2000 HP, especially since they don't counterattack as they are flying in the air. So it's high risk, high reward, but the best place to play these is when you have a planeswalker who has already walked about half the way to the building. But Netmarble, actually, I really like when a game design company reveals their thoughts on a card like this. They say in the forum post that they balanced it to be very slow moving because it was a really strong card. However, they acknowledge that they nerfed it a bit too much and are changing it from very slow to partially slow. Now, they don't exactly say what that means. I don't think I can... Yeah, so move speed very slow here. They're going to change it to partially slow. A number would be nice, but I guess it would tell us how many squares per second it moves. Just like they tell us how many times per second things attack, right? Or is it attack speed? Should be, yeah, how many times per second it launches an attack. So they do give us numbers for attack speed, but not move speed. I think that's a bit weird. And I don't personally think that the Aeronauts will make an entry into the meta with this very slow to partially slow change. If a deck enables it, it'll be okay, but I don't think any current Planeswalker or deck enables airdrop Aeronauts. So I think this will have more of an effect in draft and sealed modes. That's not what I meant to click. Okay, more white cards have been changed. The Barracks. So, some buildings are used, but the best buildings are the Lightning Tower and the Vent Sentinel and the Skull Catapult because they fight back. And white doesn't really have that. Their main building is the Barracks. The Barracks do spawn the soldiers, but people generally don't run them in constructed decks. So all they did was buff it from this 1200 HP to 1800 HP. I don't think that's... there's not much more to say about it. I mean, it is a health buff, so if you are a deck that has a flex spot and you need to be more defensive, I think the Barracks are now something to consider. Alright, onto the blue cards. The first blue card that they wanted to talk about, which I totally agree has needed addressing, is the Wavecrash Triton. Wavecrash Triton is practically ubiquitous. I think the only card you see more in a deck with a blue Planeswalker is the Sphinx of the Final Word. The Wavecrash Triton has so much health. I mean, look at this guy, 3,190 health at level 5, but the health increases are small enough that, I mean, we talked about how much health the Soul of Theros and the Tailless Paladin had. This guy has more than that. Actually, I guess he will have less health now than the new Soul of Theros. So, blue-white decks with Dovin and Teferi could consider the Soul of Theros. However, I think that the Wavecrash Triton is still superior for crowd control than the Soul of Theros is, because they said that the efficiency of the ground-wide knockback was higher and the damage was higher than other tanks, which are both true. I mean, this guy has 636 damage at my level. He has 530 base attack at level 1. It was so hard to kill the Wavecrash Triton with a ground unit that you had to invest an air unit, and even then, if they could stop the air unit, the Wavecrash Triton would deal, 530 or 630 at my level. He would just deal that damage to the tower over and over because he has so much health that your Sub-Guardian wouldn't take it out very quickly. So I totally appreciate this decreased attack nerf. They're reducing the attack by 100 points. So I think that should really help. It'll still be a good crowd control unit because of the pushback, but it will not be dealing as much damage, which will allow for better counterplay. And then the next card we're looking at is Retraction Helix, which has been called for nerfs already by the community. It's just so powerful, but niche, that it feels really bad to play a deck that runs Retraction Helix, and then if you didn't know that it was the niche, you just lose, because it sends all the units to the other lane of the battlefield. So I think it's a fine concept. I've said this before, but the Netmarble people agree that at only 1 mana, it is too frequently an extreme buff for the attacker. So they're nerfing it to 2 mana. That's it. There's no functional change. It's just 2 mana, and what that'll do is it'll give the opponent 1 more mana, effectively, to answer the push. So typically, it takes me a Planeswalker to answer a Retraction Helix push, so I don't know exactly how much this is going to do, but 1 to 2 mana was the requested nerf that I have seen on the Reddit forums. There are actually 3 more nerfs, or changes, I should say. 3 more balance changes in blue. We're looking at the Enclave Elite first. This is another instance where Netmarble tries to explain the niche that these creatures were supposed to fit, and to me it doesn't make very much sense. They were supposed to be wide area attack, but each of them only launches their spear at one air or ground unit. There are 2 of them, kind of like the Herald of the Pantheon, but how they are ranged wide area attack I didn't particularly understand. But the point is that in order to fit this niche better for blue, Netmarble has increased their range. So we don't typically see Enclave Elite, so I think this is a fine change. At 2 mana though, there is a worry about making them too strong, like too powerful. But look at this, they only have 266 health. They're taken out by a Ratchet Bomb or a high level shock. So I don't think it's particularly an issue. But this is a buff, as well as the Seagate Barracks, which are receiving a buff. It's actually the exact same buff that we saw to Barracks. It's changing the HP from 1200 to 1800, and that's it. The reason these 2 are connected is because the Seagate Barracks summon the Enclave Elite, so the Seagate Barracks actually get a huge buff in that its health is higher and the units it spawns are better. So we will see if the Seagate Barracks or the normal Barracks see increased play. I kind of think that they will, because to me a Teferi deck should run 1 or 2 of these. Now the 1 mana gain isn't game changing, but it can be game swinging, which kind of sounds like the same thing, but given that Teferi recovers you 1 mana, the fact that either of these buildings only effectively costs 3 can really help you push out a larger swarm of units when Teferi's on the battlefield. So I think it could be a bit dangerous, changing not only both the buildings but also the Enclave Elite spawned by this building. And Teferi's already powerful and making an impact on the meta, but we'll just have to see if Netmarble expected these changes and accounted for them already in the balance adjustments. I guess I can say buffs here. And then finally in blue is the Kraken. This is another great instance where I love to see that Netmarble is telling us, the players, because I personally didn't start until ManaStrike's global release, but I know that it was in open beta for a while and other people were able to play. They say that they initially had it with no lifespan. And this was actually interesting because I played Kraken in my very first Doban deck. It actually loses life throughout the, right here it says after 40 seconds, the lifespan. No other creature loses or has a lifespan. And the way the lifespan is implemented in ManaStrike is it loses health over time. This is a pretty simple way of enforcing a lifespan, I guess, but I would rather see the Ashcloud Phoenix egg type situation where it has a set amount of health and damage that it can take, but it also has this countdown. So if Kraken had a countdown as well as a set amount of health, I think that would be a little better, because as it is, you leave your Kraken on the battlefield and it slowly loses its health, and then when it finally gets used later, maybe 30 seconds after it's placed, it has so little health that it dies. So I'd rather have it keep its full health and just have a timer, and when the timer hits 0, it goes away. But that's not being changed, to be clear. That change is not happening. But Netmarble reveals that people would play out 3 Krakens and then just leave them there as a defense. So they instituted the lifespan, but the lifespan has resulted in next to no play, which if you play on probably even low ladder, you don't see. I mean, I used the Kraken, like I said, when I first was making a Doban deck and moving up, but I pretty quickly took it out. So they are changing the lifespan to 60 seconds, and I think this is quite the interesting change, because a match is only 3 bouts of 60 seconds. It's a 3-minute match. So if you can play Kraken kind of at any point in the game, you have bought it for a third of the match. So I hope that Kraken gets back in the meta, but I can see how having 3 full health, no lifespan Krakens on the battlefield was unhealthy for the game back in alpha or beta or whenever they applied the lifespan. So I would love to use the Kraken again. I thought it was a fun thing to play and just let my opponent know that I was waiting for him because the Kraken is visible on the battlefield. So I hope that the lifespan makes it a bit more of a viable card in case I go back to blue or blue-white. Alright, let's move on. I have some black cards. Doomblade is the first one. Doomblade has been a card that I have never liked. I don't like to pick it in draft. I'm happy to give it to my opponent. I don't take it in sealed either. And I don't really run black on ladder at all, so it doesn't have that much of an effect on me, but black opponents on ladder don't play Doomblade. And that's because it's 3 mana for this effect, which is not a lot, but that also doesn't make it a cycle card. And if the unit doesn't die, all you've done is dealt some damage to it. And furthermore, it's only a single unit damage, and it says it hits the creature with the highest HP, excluding planeswalkers, but that means that you can't control which one it hits. So things like Shock are better because they do AoE damage or damage to all units in the area of effect. And Ratchet Bomb is at 3 as well. And even though this does 1200 to one creature, Ratchet Bomb does maybe 500 to all creatures in the area. So Ratchet Bomb and Shock are better options at the 3 mana cost. So what Netmarble has done is added a stun for 2 seconds if the creature is not destroyed. And I think that's a very interesting choice. It's not very flavorful for Doomblade or black. Stun is really more of a red feature, and even then maybe a red-blue feature with their base in MTG instance and stuff. So stun isn't very flavorful, but I can forgive that for game balance. And honestly, the added 2-second stun makes it very comparable to Shock itself, such that if you are playing for the AoE type damage and stun, you run Shock. If you're playing for single target damage with a stun effect, you play Doomblade. I just don't know how often you want to limit yourself to a single creature stun and damage. Even though it's a lot more damage, the only thing I can think of is like a Shivan Dragon, because you know it's going to be the biggest creature in that push. The problem is if you play it against Aethersquall and Aethersquall Reaver Demon combo, or an Aethersquall Icefall Dragon combo. Let's say it hits the Aethersquall Ancient, and the Ancient is stunned. The Ancient is only attacking your building anyway, so you might save some building damage with Doomblade, but the other flyer isn't stunned, which is bad, and you still have to kill the Ancient. So even if you've done 1200 damage instead of 500 damage to the Ancient, you have to kill the Ancient and then kill the other flyer. So the 2 damage stun is good, but I think you only consider this if you're a pure black deck, or I guess if you're black in another color, but another color that isn't red. But I don't think that the stun is actually going to bring Doomblade into the meta. It'll just make it a bit of a more viable choice in the limited formats, and I might not enjoy giving this to my opponents in draft anymore. We're also getting a change to Drudge Skeletons. The 2 cards that summon them are the card Drudge Skeletons and also Rise from the Grave, so let's look at Drudge Skeletons first. It's an X mana card, which means you can hold the card when it's in your dock and it'll count up and choose how much mana you want to invest in it. However, this card sees no play. It's a really dead card because the skeletons are pretty bad. They don't have a lot of health, they don't have a lot of attack, but part of the point is that you can swarm them. And I think that maybe Reaver Demon plays this in order to count up exactly 5 skeletons. And that actually makes this change dangerous. Right now it summons 1 skeleton per 1 mana, but Netmarble, like we talked about with niches before, it wants this card to be most explosive at low mana investments. Because if you put 10 mana into 10 skeletons, that's not great. But maybe if you put 3 mana into 3 skeletons during a push, that can help you out of it. So what they've decided to do is make it 1 extra skeleton per 1 mana. so that even if you cast this at 0, and I don't know if you can cast it at 0, but if you cast it at 0, you'd get 1 skeleton, and if you cast it at 1, you'd get 2 skeletons, etc. Like I said, I think this is most dangerous with the Reaver Demon combo because it gives them 1 more unit to sacrifice to the Reaver Demon for no more mana investment. And Reaver Demon has not received any kind of balance change in this set. So I am a little nervous about this because it seems like a trivial change. It doesn't change any of the units themselves, but I don't think anyone uses Drudge Skeletons for Drudge Skeletons. The other card is this Rise from the Grave. And this is another card that's pretty much dead, specifically because it sacrifices your own cards that you've already spent mana on to summon Drudge Skeletons, which I said weren't very strong. Here they have the exact same attack and HP, in front of the enemy's main Guardian. The only deck that actively goes for the main Guardian is the Seagate Grave Titan deck, where you try to summon a Grave Titan right there and wipe out the opponent's main Guardian. And if you're running that combo, you don't want to sacrifice anything you're playing to summon some 99 damage skeletons. So, what they are choosing to do is change the mana cost up to 4, which is a lot of change for a card like this. But, it will... The, Drudge Skeletons summoned will be summoned in front of the nearest sub-guardian, and I assume that means that if no sub-guardians are left, they'll go to the main guardian, but they will be summoned in front of the nearest enemy sub-guardian, and this kind of makes this card comparable to Spectral Procession, especially at the 4 mana cost, and, well, with Spectral Procession you can summon it anywhere on the battlefield, and with this one you sacrifice your own units, but you send them right to the main guardian, or the enemy sub-guardian. So, I think the 4 mana change is correct. At 2 mana, this would be particularly dangerous. Honestly, at 2 mana, it would almost make it like a Retraction Helix, where you could sacrifice a bunch of units in an area, and suddenly they'll be somewhere else. And the advantage of this is that it can be your game-ending card once you realize that your opponent has invested everything they have in a counter push or an actual push. If they are out of mana, you can play this and already be, or immediately be at their tower and deal a ton of damage to it. So, like I said, I'm glad with the 4 mana adjustment, and I think that if Black wants to use this as its win condition, you would have a largely defensive deck so that when an enemy puts a lot into a push, you shut that down and then play Rise from the Grave, and all those units that are partially damaged and aren't very good at hitting the tower and stuff, that just you used them for their intended value on defense. You sacrifice all of them, and it's not even limited to 10. Like the Drudge Skeletons card is limited to 10. This sacrifices all of the units in the area, and summons 1 skeleton per unit sacrificed. So you sacrifice all those partially damaged, almost dead units, and suddenly your opponent has a bunch of skeletons right next to their tower. So I think that this could be quite powerful. I just don't know that Black plays that way right now. Maybe a Garruk, because he spawns the beasts or something, some other spawner type deck, could take advantage of this once the patch is live tomorrow. Okay, let's move on to red. Same thing. The 2 red cards that are being changed, the first one is the Furyblade Vampire. This is another instance where it's supposed to be a single target high damage creature, but they balanced its stats pretty well and people didn't really get that impression. So they are reducing its HP and increasing its attack to make it a higher damage creature against, a 1-to-1, or since it is, no, it's a ground creature. So, yeah, just higher attack, higher damage output, but if it is battled against, it'll die faster. So I think that's all fine. I have never played Fury Blade Vampire, but if they want to make the card more apt for its niche, I think that's totally permissible. And then Phoenix Nest is the other card. Now this is an 8-mana building, so I haven't seen it played hardly at all in constructed decks. But what they're doing is, instead of the nest summoning an egg, and then the egg has to hatch for a phoenix to come out, it just immediately summons a phoenix. In addition, they are doubling this building's health, from 1500 up to 3000. So the other buildings, the 4-mana buildings, we saw a 600 point health increase. This is more than 2. This is 2.5 times that increase itself. So the fact that this building is moving up to 3000 health, what we don't know, we do know, its lifespan is not changing. So it will still only be on the field for 40 seconds, which means it will lose more health per second. But if you were using it for some reason, and like I said, I've never seen this done, if you were using it as a distraction from your main guardian, this is a lot more health for an enemy team, an enemy push to beat through. So I don't know, it's not used anyway, so I guess the buff is a good change. Maybe it'll bring it into the meta, but I just don't think an 8-mana building, and all it summons are the phoenixes. The phoenixes are good, sure, but it summons them so slowly that you can't really build up a group of them. So I just don't know that this change, even though it's a very powerful buff to this card, I don't know that it will bring this into decks that people want to play. The last color is green. Here we go. And green is getting a change to Balath, which I'm very happy with. Balath has become a frustrating card with with Vivien now. Balath as a tank has become a very frustrating card. So what they are doing is a lot of things. Read the article for details. But basically they are making it less of a tank, I would say. Increasing the attack and decreasing the HP such that it's easier to kill, which I absolutely agree with, but it hits harder. And I think that's okay. I mean, Balath, when it reaches the Sub-Guardian, is already pretty devastating, so I don't know how much worse it's going to be with a greater attack Balath. But my largest problem is that you just can't kill the Balath in enough time to also kill the units that are placed behind it. So this change will make it easier to kill the Balath, and then your units will still be around, hopefully, to attack the units that the opponent has placed behind it. Additionally, with the increase in attack, they are decreasing the attack speed. So, like I said, it is going to hurt a lot to take those hits from the Balath, but you're going to be taking them only once every 3 seconds. So hopefully with its decreased attack, or its decreased HP and decreased attack speed, you will be able to take... you'll just be able to kill it faster and then take less damage overall from the Balath. This, to be clear, this still leaves it as a strong card for mono green decks. And then finally, we have Herald of the Pantheon. Once again, Netmarble wanted to have this as a niche card, but it wasn't really fulfilling the niche. So these 2-mana, these low mana cards, they wanted to be higher attack, so that if you just had a little bit of mana but needed a defense, you could play them out. But they weren't intended to be very high HP, because you didn't invest too much in them in the first place. So they were largely defensive, an emergency, ranged, or air attack. So the Herald of the Pantheon receive an attack increase, but a corresponding HP decrease, such that they will deal better as an emergency backup, and because they attack air. I typically, when I, just mess around with green, they're my air defense, so they will kill those air units faster. But if someone ratchet bombs you, I mean, these guys are just dead. They only have 330 health. Even at, their health will be decreased down to 286 base. So a ratchet bomb or shock even will just take them out. But the point is not for them to live. The point is for them to be unit answers to other units, so they receive an increase in attack. I think that's okay. Okay, and then let's wrap up the video on my opinions about these changes with the colorless cards. First is good old Haunted Guardian. The reasoning is that it's overwhelmingly prevalent, and that is true. Almost every deck runs Haunted Guardian. Like I said, 3 mana isn't exactly a cycle mana point, so you want your 3 mana cards to be valuable, and boy is Haunted Guardian valuable. He has 2,500 base HP, so that makes him a pretty good tank at 3. Not your main tank, but he can survive a while. And his attack is 330, so he performs really well, and Netmarble recognizes that and is bumping down his HP by 600 points. The Clockwork Beetle is yet another instance of Netmarble wanting certain cards to be very niche, and just like the Herald of the Pantheon, they are meant to be answers to your opponent's units. So they are getting an increase in attack but a decrease in HP, such that when you play them, they will do more damage, especially since there's 3 of them. They'll do a lot more damage to the units that are on the battlefield, but they will die out faster because they are not intended to be tower damage units just sent in as tower damage. So they get an increase in attack, and some people play Clockwork Beetle. I prefer Hadron Scouts because they fulfill a similar function, but cost a lot less. However, that was probably why Clockwork Beetle got the change and not Hadron Scouts, is because Clockwork Beetle are a lot less popular. So by giving them more attack, there's a chance they outweigh the Hadron Scouts in certain decks that are, specifically I would say decks that are lacking flying or air unit answers. And finally, we have the Howling Golem, which is a colorless tank unit. Every player receives this in the beginning, so I don't think it's particularly better at 4,000 HP than any other or any colored tank. However, they are correspondingly increasing the HP so that it does compete at the role of tank with units in this other mana colors, like the Balath, for example. However, in order to keep it balanced, its attack is being reduced from 307 down to 256. That's a 50-point attack nerf. And I think that's just because if you left it at its attack but significantly increased its HP, it would be too overpowered. So this makes it a consideration, probably not the choice in my opinion, consideration for your tank unit, especially if you are maybe a red deck that wants to make a tower push but doesn't really have a high HP unit available. Maybe I could consider Howling Golem just to absorb all of that frontline damage, but know that he's not going to deal very much damage to the Sub-Guardian once he gets there. So that is all of the changes that were announced today. Let me know in the comments what you think about the changes, if you're excited to play any of these cards, or disappointed that certain cards dodged nerfs, or like to play cards that you think deserved buffs, or think that the balance changes weren't good to your cards, or absolutely tell me if you agree. Well, agree with me, disagree with me, but more specifically agree with Netmarble's changes. Let's not be toxic though, but I would love to start discussions. So let me know in the comments if you are still around and haven't already liked the video. Consider doing that. Subscribe to the channel. I do post videos every other day, whether they are ranked ladder play or event gameplays. And thanks for sticking around. I appreciate you, and see you next time.